our next conversation. And our final for this portion of Signal focuses on the intersection of business and policy. I'm honored to welcome back David Taylor, the CEO of P&G, who is joined by Senator Rob Portman, Senator from Ohio. Senator Portman has been serving in government since first being elected as a representative from here in the state of Ohio in 1993. Please welcome Senator Portman and David Taylor to the Signal stage.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, it's good to have you both here. Senator, I imagine that at any moment you might be called away to go do more senatorial duties. So let's focus on you while we've got you. Let me ask you the first question. You have announced that after 10 years in the Senate, you will not be seeking re-election. That is unusual for our politicians, especially popular ones such as yourself. And you did cite partisan gridlock as one of the reasons for your decision. So let me ask you this, is D.C. as bad from the inside as it seems to be from the outside?
Well, it sometimes is. I'm in the middle of a bipartisan process right now to try to get a infrastructure bill passed, which would be great for the country. And I've been working with the White House and with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. So I'm hoping this is the exception to the rule. But as a rule right now, unfortunately, there's not enough bipartisanship, not enough consensus building to find an answer. And too often, members of my party, the Republican Party, and members of the other party, the Democratic Party, go into their corners and seem happy to be there until the next election. So it is frustrating. And in terms of my situation, I was in the House for 12 years. I also was in 4 different administrations. So for 30 years, I've been doing this. I expected to do it for 3 or 4 when I first got in. So I can't wait to get back to the private sector, honestly, and get back home to Ohio and get back to doing some nonprofit work that I was doing before and help from the outside. So for me, it's partly because of the frustration of making it that it's more difficult to find that bipartisan sweet spot and to get things done. But also it's just on a personal basis time for me to go home full time. And I owe it to my family. And frankly, I'm looking forward to helping where I can on the outside.
Well, we thank you for 20 years of service, almost. And David, as CEO of one of the largest companies in the United States and certainly Ohio, you've gotten to know Senator Portman quite well. First of all, can't you make him change his mind? But on a more serious note, can you reflect on your work with the senator, how the relationship has changed over the decades between companies and leaders in the government?
Certainly happy to. And first, I want to say a huge thank you to Senator Portman. He's been one of the most distinguished members of whether it's the House, the U.S. Trade Representative, the Director of Office Management and Budget, or the Senate for almost the last 12 years. So it's been an amazing career. And he is known, for those that don't know him, as one of the most effective bipartisan legislators. He works for the good of Ohio, the good of the country, and tries to create a better world for all of us. Many of you may not know, he's sponsored many bipartisan bills. Often we talk about where the challenges are in Washington, but whether it was going back many years ago, fighting drug addiction, fighting opioid addiction, bipartisan legislation sponsored by Senator, at that time probably Representative Portman. He was very active in fighting both sex trafficking as well, some effective legislation on that as well. And then he was one of the key architects of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was critical because it helped U.S. companies have a competitive rate globally. Before 2017, we were much higher than the average of the developed countries called OECD. And today we're right about at the average, just slightly actually above U.S. companies are. And it's because of the leadership of Senator Portman and working across the aisle and with people within his party that we've had the benefit of just tremendous support in Ohio and more broadly the benefit for the country. So yes, there's been a lot of overlap between P&G and P&G's interest in tax, trade, and policies that support our people, as well as the work he's led in Washington. And he's been a great friend and He's somebody we very much admire and appreciate the work he's done. He's always been willing to listen to us. He's always been accessible. And I think for any of the stakeholders in Ohio and more broadly the country, we've benefited tremendously from his service.
Well, David, thank you. Could I say a word about Procter? I'm a Procter protege, I guess, because my dad worked at Procter & Gamble for a couple of years early in his career. He was a chemist, and he loved it. And he learned at Procter many lessons, but two in particular. One is the importance of profit-sharing plans. And for the Procter associates out there, you're fortunate. And second, he learned how to empower people and to help people reach their potential in life. And he went on to become a small businessman probably a few years after he left Procter. And he always said that his success in small business was entirely due to his Procter background. He started off with 4 people. My mom was the bookkeeper in a little distribution company. And he put a profit-sharing plan in right away, a Procter & Gamble profit-sharing plan. He made no money in the first 3 years. So there was no profit to be shared. But he eventually found his niche, and that profit-sharing plan today, for guys I've known my whole life who've turned a wrench their whole career, these are men and women who are, lift truck technicians and mechanics. Some of them are retiring with a very healthy nest egg, sometimes $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, thanks to that Procter & Gamble style profit-sharing plan, and of course the 401k when it came into effect in the 70s. But that's what he learned from Procter. He would have beer and bologna meetings, he called them, which you probably couldn't get away with these days. But it was a Procter idea, to bring, again, everybody in the company, the guy that's sweeping the shop floor and the salesperson and the CEO together to talk about what was going on and to have better communication and empower people to do their best. He always said he was not in it. He was a lift truck distributor. It wasn't for the lift trucks. It was for the people. And that he felt he got from Procter. So I grew up with that. And I have this sense instilled in me that Procter takes care of its people and makes people feel like they're part of the family. And that's essential. I think in corporate America today, there's not enough of that, frankly. People talk about inclusive capitalism. Well, I think it's been practiced for a long time at Procter. Second, when you go to lobby someone like a senator or someone in your country, wherever you are today on this call, I hope you will do what I've experienced from the Procter lobbyists, which is not come in and twist arms, but come in and provide information. And that's all I ask for, is give us the data, give us the information straight up. What will these tax policies mean to Procter & Gamble's ability to compete globally? What is the actual result of a trade policy with Mexico, like the USMCA, for the Procter people who live in Cincinnati but support international sales? We have a lot of folks who live in Cincinnati. We're proud of that. Also, about 40% of them are here in Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown, because of the global sales. So for members of Congress and others to understand that changes your perspective. And you realize that Procter has to be able to compete in other markets in Europe and in Asia and Latin America and Africa in order to have good jobs in America. And certainly that's been quite successful for Procter in the last few years. And I want to congratulate all the associates for those successes. But it's competitive out there, isn't it? And every day is competitive. So as someone who brushed my teeth with Crest this morning and used a little Head and Shoulders, maybe I should have used one of your fancier shampoos for my hair. But, I appreciate what Procter does in terms of giving us the data, the information to be able to make sound decisions. We're not always going to agree, but I really appreciate the honest relationship we've had and the ability to be able to help the people who I represent.
Senator, before you may have to go, I'm just curious, as you contemplate leaving Washington, coming back to Ohio, what do you think is the most important work yet to be done in Washington as it relates to the issues you just raised around global competitiveness?
Well, I'm in the middle of 2 projects right now that relate directly to global competitiveness. One is this infrastructure bill. China spends about 10% of its GDP, as an example, on infrastructure. We spend about 2%. You can look out the window behind David there and see the Brent Spence Bridge, which is not only functionally obsolete, it's incredibly inefficient. There are traffic jams every single morning and every night there. And what economists will tell you, right, left, or center, is that if we fix our infrastructure, our ports, our roads, our airports, our bus system, we will not only be able to make people's lives easier, but we will make the economy more efficient, therefore more productive. Therefore, you're actually going to see more revenue coming in. I just spoke to the head of the Congressional Budget Office today, pushing him to give me some data on this. And he says that roughly 1/3 of the cost of our infrastructure bill, which is about $600 billion. It's a big bill. About 1/3 of that cost will come back in terms of more tax revenue coming in over time to our economy because of this. So it is essential to our competitiveness and to people's, ability to have a shorter commute and less time waiting in traffic, and to have Procter & Gamble be able to get its supplies from Asia that are now stuck at the port in LA because the port infrastructure is not there. So it affects all of us. Second, I would say the broader issue of trade and taxes and how they relate. And our global competitiveness is going to be judged on what our policies are ultimately. The people of America are competitive. We have a great entrepreneurial spirit. But if you don't put in place the right policies, then it won't matter. And David talked a little about that in terms of the international tax situation. We're not asking for big tax cuts for businesses. What we're asking for is the ability for businesses to be able to compete, American companies with global companies, on a level playing field. Same with trade. We're not asking to hurt China by increasing tariffs. We want a level playing field where we're able to give American workers the ability to compete fairly. And by the way, this same Congressional Budget Office has recently told us that about 75% of the tax increase on businesses, if Democrats choose to do this in this latest reconciliation bill we were talking about, if they do that, that'll come out of workers' pay and workers' wages. So it very much affects the working families who I represent and around the country and truly around the world. So we have to be careful to put in place policies that encourage competitiveness and allow America to have a fair shake. And that's all we ask for.
David, I ask you the same question. What would you like to see out of Washington on these issues over the next couple of years?
I think Senator Portman said it extremely well. Infrastructure is critical to us. We're one of the largest shippers in this country. And roads, bridges, what he said about ports is very real. If you're getting something from outside the country, you have to now allow many more weeks because of the uncertainty of how long it'll take to get through the ports. And it's not just business, it's for all the citizens, all the people that are in the U.S. or travel to visit us in the U.S. We need better infrastructure, so I completely agree there. And one aspect of infrastructure that Senator Portman's been very helpful on is there's a part that's very important on some topics we talked earlier, which is sustainability. So things like recycling infrastructure. We need the ability to have the support to be able to collect, and then we can process and then create a secondary market so that whether it's plastic or any other item that can be recycled. The U.S. does not have a high recycling rate, and not everybody has access to the collection means. So those are very important, and this is one where Senator Portman's, again, been a leader, trying to find ways within the broad infrastructure package to make sure recycling gets addressed as well. And then he mentioned very well and said it very, very well, competitive tax, and then trade policies that allow us access to other markets. That's all U.S. companies want, which is the opportunity to compete on a level playing field. I have tremendous confidence in the people of P&G, and I have tremendous confidence in our country's ability to compete effectively. We just want a level playing field, and then we'll turn us loose. We'll do well.
Well said.
Well, one of the policy issues that we spent a fair amount of time talking about today is the role of technology in society. It seems to be a focus of the current administration in terms of potential regulation or policy making. Senator Portman, I'm curious if you have thoughts on where all this is going.
Well, let me talk about technology in a slightly different way, which is broadband as well, since it's a big part of this infrastructure bill. Traditionally, infrastructure is looked at as roads and bridges, other hard assets, and the investments are made over time to help our transportation system, as an example, work better. But in today's economy, broadband is really part of our infrastructure. It's the digital infrastructure of our country. And in many places in the United States, we don't have access to broadband at any speed, including in Ohio, where about 1/3 of our counties do not have effective access to broadband. And then even in our urban areas where there is access to the backbone of technology, so you might have the cable companies have come into more of our urban areas, and you have the ability to access fiber optic cables. You don't have the knowledge to be able to use it, or perhaps the means to be able to use it. So we're addressing all of that in this legislation with an historic commitment, unprecedented commitment of $65 billion over the next 5 years on building out our broadband infrastructure, and it'll be relatively fast speeds too, because it's important that we be able not just to do our homework online, which is really important in a lot of these rural areas, particularly during the pandemic was important, but also telehealth and telework. And that will help expand the reach of technology, but importantly for me, it'll help expand the reach of entrepreneurship and small businesses. And so it helps everyone. And my hope is that this infrastructure bill will pass in part because it'll be really good for our economy to have that technology in place. Again, it's about competition too, because as you know, many countries are well ahead of us, and not just developed countries, but also some countries that are considered developing countries are doing a better job in kind of leapfrogging us on that technology. In terms of Google and Facebook and Twitter and other issues, that's an ongoing debate, how they would be regulated. And I do think there's kind of a consensus around the fact that we do need to do more to look at these platforms to be sure that, they are providing fair access to everybody and treating people fairly, because in effect, they have become a monopoly of sorts in terms of providing information, and incredibly important. I'll give you one example of the importance of the internet, which is today in Cuba, there are people demonstrating on the streets. This erupted a few days ago, really out of nowhere, people thought, and they couldn't figure out why. As it was analyzed by some people, they realized it was the internet. Unfortunately, some of the people who realized that were the Cuban authorities, who then shut down the internet. So these demonstrators couldn't organize to be able to exercise, their right to speak. And but it's an example of where the internet and technology is playing a role across our globe. And in this case, allowing the people of Cuba to take to the street to express their concerns with the government. And my hope is that we as a U.S. government can help to restore that internet access.
David, I wanted to ask, and this is another theme throughout the day, here you are sharing the spotlight with a senator, and 2 decades ago that might not have been normal. You might not have even agreed to do it because politics was for the politicians. Points of view on social issues were taken by politicians, not by CEOs of major corporations. P&G, as we've seen through the work that's been spotlighted throughout today, has taken a point of view on social issues, on equity, on gender. Can you comment on the role of the corporation in society and how that's changed over the last decade or so?
I think the expectations are very, very high across a broad group of stakeholders, but P&G's always been a good corporate citizen. We believe in serving consumers. We believe in taking care of our employees. As Senator Portman mentioned, it was an experience with his father, which is great to hear. And we believe you'd want to be a very productive citizen in any community where you live or work. And to me, that's been part of P&G for many, many years. But today, what is different is consumers want to know the values of the companies behind the brands they use. And so we have tried to make sure that people are aware. We're happy and proud that our board is about 50-50 men, women, and that's important. We want to create an environment where everybody in our company has an opportunity to come to work as they are and be able to contribute to the full extent of their ability. To the extent we can unleash the full productive capability of the people at P&G, will compete very effectively. And communicating that in thoughtful ways makes sense. And on environmental sustainability, I think we all understand that there are some immediate actions that we all individually and P&G as a company can take to address some of the challenges on wastewater, energy, and the broader greenhouse gas footprint, and we're working those things. So it's been embedded in how we do business for decades. We have certainly stepped up the work we're doing, and we're stepping up our communication. And again, I think our interaction with our leaders in Washington is just to communicate. We want, just as we're talking about environmental sustainability, recycling is important, but this is already another area where there's proactive work going on by Senator Portman and others, and my belief is it will be a bipartisan move to address things like the infrastructure to allow us to address many of these challenges.
Well, thank you. Final quick question for you, Senator, before you go. I think a lot of the audience and certainly you hear it, in the news media, feel like the country is hopelessly divided. You've been a bipartisan leader. Can you give us a little bit of hope that we might be able to get out of this rut and get back to work?
Well, John, my message of hope would be that I think that's where most Americans are. I mean, unfortunately, the political parties seem to be pushing out to the sides, whereas I hear a lot when I'm back home about, the frustration of not being able to come together and find common ground and solve problems. And So I'm still here for another 18 months. As I'm the Republican lead on this infrastructure bipartisan package right now. I've got 4 or 5 other bipartisan projects I hope to get done before I leave. So I'm going to be busy. But even after I leave, I think from the outside, I can encourage it. And I think others can as well, just by letting your member of Congress or your senator or in your country, wherever you are, your legislative and elected officials know that you expect people to come together to solve problems. You're not going to reward the kind of behavior that leads to more polarization. I will say something else, though, too, and this is a little more controversial, perhaps, and a little harder to kind of wrap your head around and figure out what the answer is. I think to a large extent, legislators, not taking us off the hook, and presidents reflect the country and our constituents. And I say that because I find also back home, people are more polarized. So partly you could blame it on leadership. And I think it's in all of our interest to show leadership that brings people together rather than polarization. But it also is true that in our society today, people tend to be taking pretty firm decisions one way or the other, whether it's discussions in the grocery store in front of the Procter & Gamble shelf, or whether it's at home around the dining room table, or whether it's our social gatherings. I mean, people tend to kind of be going into their corners. And I think we need to think about that from a broader cultural point of view. I blame both media and the internet for part of it, because I think our media tends to be so divided. Go on TV tonight in the States, if you're in the States, or even in your country, because I just got back from a trip throughout Latin America where I saw some of the same, and try to find the news rather than a perspective. And it's harder and harder, and I'm looking for the news. I want to know the facts. Give me the data, and then I can make my mind up. But it's hard to find that. So you go on cable television in the States today, you're going to find a strong point of view on the right or on the left, harder to find something in the middle. And I would even say with some of our mainstream media, that's true as well. But the internet particularly, I think, is helping to divide the country, because people are finding a comfortable place where they can have information that reaffirms their view, whatever it is. And we've seen this taken to dangerous levels, of course, I would say on both sides of the political spectrum, where misinformation or even disinformation and sometimes purposely being provided by these folks on the right or on the left is influencing our country, and not just our political system, but how we relate to one another. So it's a bigger challenge, and it goes to, you mentioned technology earlier, and I mentioned it's almost a monopoly. If you're not on Facebook or on Twitter or some of these other very, very popular platforms, then you can't get your message across effectively. And if you are, and you're doing so irresponsibly, sometimes there is, because of what's called Section 230, which is part of our law, which allows anything to be on basically and not be the responsibility of the platform. You see a lot of irresponsible stuff. So I think we got to think about that as a country. How do we get back to a situation where we're going to have our differences, we can express them respectfully, but at the end of the day, we figure out a way to come together to solve problems, whether it's in our household or in the halls of government.
Here's to that. Thank you, Senator Portman, for your service. Thank you, David, for joining this conversation. Really appreciate it, and best of luck getting all of that bipartisan work through in the next 18 months.
Thanks, John. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Senator. And just one comment. I very much appreciate what you just said, and that all of us at P&G and more broadly, all listening, we need to be productive members that engage and be part of the solution. This is about coming together, both as a society in the U.S. or more broadly. We have an opportunity, and I think that was a good challenge, which is to be passionate collaboration, which is have a point of view, but come together and do what's good for the whole. But thank you very much, Senator, for your service. We very much appreciate what you do for us.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you both.